Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome everybody to the show. We are unfortunately without Mr. Dan tonight. He said something came up at the last minute. Everything is supposedly okay. So let's hope Dan gets a speedy resolution to whatever's going on, and he should be back next week. In the meantime, I am stuck with this absurdly shitty topic that I picked out, not knowing I was going to be flying solo tonight. So we're not clipping counters. We are instead sleeving cards. These are the cards from Europa Universalis, The Price of Power, which I picked up not too long ago and am quite impressed with, and impressed enough to have bought all the additional ding-dongs that go with it, including the extra bot decks, which is what these are, and the metal coins. I guess that was a Kickstarter add-on, but I didn't get it on a Kickstarter. I got a buddy who buys two of everything, so I bought his extra copy instead. And my exquisitely constructed 3D printed card decks are becoming a bit difficult on this particular task because they're like exactly the right height for these cards. So our topic tonight is Wild West war games, and my first kind of impression of that topic was, oh my god, what a terrible topic. There's more than maybe you'd necessarily think. In particular, there's a lot of games that have come out over the last couple of years about the Indian Wars of the American West. I think I've managed to do that. These are the 3D printed counter trays or card deck trays for the American mini sized cards. Just trying to make sure I'm not getting any sleeves caught in there. So no one knows where Dan is at or what he is doing. So he is kind of like the druids in that respect. So, but that's okay. We'll be okay. Dan will be back next week, and I didn't have time to rustle somebody else up, although I probably could have gotten somebody on at the last minute, I suppose. But we didn't do that. So we're going to talk about Wild West war games now. I think, a lot of us of like a certain generation are going to think, when we think Wild West war games, of Avalon Hill's Gunslinger, which is certainly the first thing that came to mind to me. And there's a lot of Western themed games, not necessarily war games, like Great Western Trail and of course Oregon Trail. And I think there's at least two board game versions of that. So no one knows where the bodies have been buried over here. So I'm using, by the way, these are Gamegenic matte finish sleeves, and the fit is very good. They're not too thin, nor are they too thick. And the deck things that I made are built to some pretty fine tolerances. So if there's close to the maximum number of cards in that particular stack of cards, then there's a bit of a squeeze. I'm thinking of building a deck press to like press the deck so that it will fit better. Roots, and I would like to hear what other folks think of Wild West war games. What are some examples? Now, again, including the topic of the wars against the Native Americans, there's a fair amount that have come out over the last, say, 10 years, including Plains Indian Wars from GMT, which is a 2022 release, and which has been fairly well received. In addition to that, we have Comancheria, which is a Joel Toppin game, Navajo Wars, which is a Joel Toppin game. Both also, I don't know what that noise just meant. Both also from GMT. Meandering Mike mentions Worthington Games Cowboys Way of the Gun, which I believe was mentioned or covered in a Gilbert Collins video on this exact topic, actually. And Rudy Armendariz mentions Boot Hill, which is an old early TSR RPG. I think a co-design between Gary Gygax and a couple of other co-designers. As I recall, I haven't actually opened a copy of Boot Hill in many, many, many times. Many, many, many years, I should say, and didn't think all that highly of it. I believe what I had was the second edition, but it may have been the first edition, and I have not done any legwork on what's what in the history of Boot Hill editions. Certainly, it does, like a lot of those early TSR RPGs before there was a clear delineation between RPGs and war games. Boot Hill is a great example of that, actually, because it's got a whole lot of wargamey stuff in it, including a map with counters and all that stuff. Um, Mark G, thank you for reminding me. I did, in fact, call the hotel to. I didn't call the hotel. I booked the whole thing through Expedia, so I canceled it through Expedia, but it is taken care of. So we are set for Origins, and that is the next convention that we will be at. I guess it's not totally impossible that I will spin out to Gen Con and or WBC for a day trip, but that's kind of what we'd be looking at, would be a day trip type of affair in either case. WBC might be could be an overnighter, but certainly I'm not going for the whole time. But there's plenty of people I know and would, like to have the chance to talk to and hang out with that will end up showing up at WBC. I think I'm going to put these in their original package so I know that they're American minis. So the regular cards in this thing are American Standard, which is itself fairly unusual. Much more common to see European standard sized playing cards in hobby games of all kinds, not just war games. But this is an exception. And another exception would be stuff that comes out of Decision. At least some of those Decision games also have, in addition to their otherwise remarkable quality. These are upside down. That's not acceptable. We are incredibly OCD here, folks. In addition, so Mark McNair also played Boot Hill. John C. says that Gilbert Collins may have designed his own spaghetti western game but didn't get it published. And John Longshore suggests the topic of, was Benedict Arnold the best general in the Revolutionary War? I've got an even more needlessly provocative topic for you, actually, there, John. Was Robert E. Lee the best general in the American Civil War? Which we are not going to touch upon tonight. And this show is not the right place for that unless we are able to trick an actual historian into coming on, which does not seem incredibly likely, and I don't count. So, Yaquinto, Meandering Mike mentions Yaquinto's Apache game of the Old West. There is also I Will Fight No More Forever, which I believe was originally a SimCan game, Simulations Canada. That's basically Steven Newberg was the designer, and as far as I'm able to ascertain, Steve Newberg was the pretty much Simulations Canada. And a newer edition of that came out in a Paper Wars, I don't know when, but sometime in the last 5 or 6 years, I believe. John C. is a Braxton Bragg man. I guess if you're going to go low, go low. Jeff Beeler mentions Valverde by Richard Berg or Bloody Kansas. I don't think that Bloody Kansas is, boy, it's it's another one of those things that's like, I don't know, maybe. I haven't really looked at it. It's from Decision Games. It came out a couple of years ago, and it's gotten a reasonably good reputation. The guys from the players, they liked it, for example. I'm not sure that Blood on the Ohio counts as a Wild West game just because it's not far enough west. That's French and Indian War, I think, but it might be earlier than that, actually. There's a whole host of relatively little known conflicts that took place before and I think after the French and Indian Wars, or the French and Indian War, and that American education system being what it is, we literally never hear about, like King Philip's War, which there is a game on. King Philip's War is actually, if we're counting Blood on the Ohio, I think we might want to mention that too. And as Kilroy, well, thanks for stopping by, mentions, there is a series from Legion Games that covers generally American Western topics. I think the Alamo and Adobe Walls, and there's at least one other one, I believe. John Stanley asks if the topic covers Mexican-American War. Properly, yeah, I suppose it should. And if we do that, then we should talk about Halls of Montezuma and Gringo and a number of other things. Um, North Ranger, welcome to the stream, mentions Prairie Aflame by Legion War Games. That's one I'm not familiar with. There's also Avalon Hill's Geronimo. I'm pretty sure that was a original to Avalon Hill, and that was a Richard Berg game. Other than that, and then it appears to have a point-to-point map. Now it's an area map. I don't really know a whole lot about that, but it does have like the entire American West in it. Oh, I guess John C. We have just literally just mentioned Geronimo. So Halls of Montezuma, as I recall, got a bit of a rocky start, and they had to put Veracruz from SPI, as mentioned by Rudy Armendariz. Good catch on that one. I've actually got that too. And in fact, I think of all the games that we've mentioned so far, that might be the only one currently in my library. And that's there because it's an SPI game and not because of necessarily interest in the topic. Well, that's actually, no, I'm wrong. I've got Gringo as well because I have the entire Great Battles of the American Civil War series from GMT at this point. Took a great deal of trouble to run down a river of death. And of course, they then announced, oh, yeah, we're working on a new edition. Ha ha ha. John C. Talks about the shaky rule book from Halls of Montezuma. I believe that was revised. This was kind of one of GMT's more infamous face plants on this particular excursion. So I do have full-sized American Standard deck boxes coming out off too. I have not well, the first prototype of those is actually on the printer right now, and I will get to see it in the morning because it's like a 10-hour print. So Kim Mates, thanks for sharing. Much appreciated. I feel like there were some extra folks in the show last night who stopped by because you had shared that there. And somebody pointed that out to me, and I'm like, oh, he did. Oh, that's cool. Thank you. So thank you, and thanks for stopping by. Yeah, good call. And John Stanley mentions Cactus Throne, the Mexican War of Independence, or Mexican War of 1862 to 1867, which is not the Mexican War of Independence. That'd be a Mexican war that I know exactly squat about, which would include, also the Mexican War. My entire knowledge of the Mexican War that we mean when we here in the U.S. say the Mexican War comes from the fact that a whole bunch of military leaders who became very prominent during the American Civil War got started becoming prominent in the Mexican War, and that includes Robert E. Lee. And so John Longshore, there is an upcoming game called Halls of Montezuma from Fort Circle. That is about, you may be thinking of Shores of Tripoli. Halls of Montezuma, I would imagine, is about the Halls of Montezuma, right? So no, that should be Mexican War. So you may be thinking of Shores of Tripoli, actually. Iggy Quick Tall. Dan is not going to make it tonight. He had something come up. He assures me that he is, in fact, okay. And hopefully he will be back on his regular petard next week. So stuff does come up from time to time. And really, between the two of us, we really miss very few of these live shows. So Carl mentions that he never had an issue with Halls of Montezuma perhaps due to dyslexia. That might be the case. Yeah, these are going incorrectly orientated. I'm pretty sure that's not really a word, but we're using it tonight since we're a little tired. We've had a busy work week. We had a relatively busy weekend. And we're kind of just catching up to a variety of affairs that we needed to get caught up on over the first 2 days of this week. So Jeff Beeler mentions Battle Game Book 1, The Wild West 1975. Which includes 4 games: Buffalo Hunters, Red Clouds War, Lincoln County War, and Iron Horse. Very interesting. David Imperato, welcome back to the stream. So yeah, that's I mean, I got to assume, without having actually seen it, I got to assume that's about the literal Halls of Montezuma that is in the in the song. and that happens in the Mexican War. So, Enrique Romero, thanks for stopping by. Welcome to the stream. Joseph Sample, any relation to our good bro Marty Sample by any chance? Unless Marty's got a evil twin brother or an alias of some kind. So I would like to thank everybody for stopping in. If you haven't been here before, this is our weekly show, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays, in which we usually have a topic that we spend 5 or 10 minutes on, and then spend the remainder of the hour talking about whatever random shit comes up or gets mentioned in the chat, or whatever tangent either Dan or myself managed to go on going on. So last week we had a snafu which prevents the video from coming up. That's really my fault, so I will take the heat for that. But we're back on track now. And then of course Dan has his, if you're not aware, Dan has his Wargaming news show that is released just after midnight on Friday night / Saturday morning. And then I've got usually an unboxing video a week, sometimes some more videos, and then a Monday live stream for anybody that hasn't stopped by for that. So since we got new folks, the entering Mike mentions Flying Frogs, Shadows of Brimstone, and Knuckle Dusters Gunfight Gunfight Royale, which appears to have both of which appear to be miniatures games from what he says. Which explains why I've never heard of either one. Yeah, Shadows of Brimstone sounds like a Warhammer Fantasy RPG supplement to me. That's Shadows over Bogenhaven, I'm aware. But Commancheria we mentioned, and that's another Joel Toppin game on the American West. And Joel's games have tended to be pretty well received. But I haven't played either of them. Are there only 2 or are there 3? There are 3, according to BGG. The other, the third of which appears to be an add-on or article or something about the Battles of the American Revolution series, which is definitely not a Western American Wild West topic. Very good. Jeff Anderson mentions Lords of the Sierra Madre. I presume that's a bit of a legendary game, and let's say it's got a bit of a mixed reputation. There are people that really love it, including a friend of mine, and there are other people who are like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, that's no thanks." Pax Porfiriana. What is Pax Porfiriana actually about? Because I'm a little unclear on that. And Kilroy mentions I Will Fight No More Forever, which we did mention. Of course, Gunslinger from Avalon Hill was the very first game we mentioned, which should surprise exactly nobody. There's a lot of stuff in this damn game, let me tell you. Despite the generally kind of lavish storage solution that comes with the game, I found the card management solution much less satisfactory than the wooden pieces management solution. So we will be keeping the wooden pieces management solution and tossing the card tray in the rubbish bin. Alistair Logie, welcome back to the show. So Hookers and Blow, not on the topic tonight. And John Stanley mentions GURPS, which I'm actually playing in a GURPS game right now. It's not a Wild West GURPS game, but I was very hot to do a Wild West RPG when Deadwood was on, and I was lapping that up every week. But that I got better, and so to date, I think the closest thing to a Western RPG I have played is Dogs in the Vineyard, which, if you're not familiar with it, you're sort of religious crusaders in a unspecific Wild West, fighting kind of whatever you want, but like demons and shit mostly. And of course, there's Deadlands too, which is the supernatural Wild West, and there's a whole bunch of that kind of thing in the RPG space of Wild West with guns, Wild West. Well, they all got guns. Wild West with zombies, or Wild West with voodoo, or Wild West with demons, or Wild West with Nazis, or Wild West with all kind of other things. Iggy Crichton mentions the Indian Wars game. That's the actual name of the game series from Legion War Games. And there are 3 of them: Adobe Walls, Rosebud Creek, and Little Bighorn. They haven't done the Alamo, but of course SPI did the Alamo. And there's a tough topic. I believe an Eric Lee Smith design. So anybody that can swallow that thing, holy cow. FIFA A, thanks for stopping by. Mentions that White Wolf had a werewolf, the Wild West. So for those who don't know, who aren't in the loop with this, you've all probably heard of Vampire the Masquerade, the supernatural RPG where you play vampires that was published by White Wolf. And I forget the name of the current publisher of that stuff. And it's got a big history that I'm not going into, but it was basically all modern day supernatural stuff. Where in Werewolf you play a werewolf, and in Vampire you play vampires, and in Mage you play mages. You get the picture. So, but they were all modern day, and at some point they decided to do like a historical version of each game. Vampire got the Dark Ages, Werewolf got the Wild West. Mage got the, what was it called? The Sorcerer's Crusade, which was Renaissance. And I think that Wraith got World War One, actually, which is a really good idea if you're familiar with Wraith at all. Possibly the most depressing RPG ever done. Iggy Cricktal, thanks for stopping by. He has to run. His ASL game is about to start. Kilroy mentions Custer's Last Stand. There have been a fair number of games about the Little Bighorn. I can tell you that. John Longshore says that he had shipping issues with Europa Universalis. I know that a couple people have gotten them dinged up, but like I said, I didn't get the Kickstarter. I got a buddy who buys two of everything, and in this case, two deluxe editions. If you do buy it, and my buddy told me this, because I was like, I'm going to look and see if anybody has this at Buckeye Game Fest. No. But he said you really want the deluxe edition, and having looked at the differences, and which there's a video on, I'm inclined to agree. You really do. You're only getting like half the game if you don't get the deluxe edition. Kilroy says Cluster's Last Stand, which is, that may have been a Freudian slip there. That's conceivable. So it sounds like John had so many issues with Europa Universalis that they had to send him multiple copies. I'm pretty impressed with it. I got to sit in on a little learning session. The Revolution was not televised session with the designer. So thanks, Liz, for setting that up and inviting me. And it's pretty cool. It's fairly complicated by the standards of Euro games, but it's kind of a war game for Euro gamers, if you know what I'm saying. There's plenty of fighting that's going to happen in it. In fact, if you start the regular 1444 campaign, which is the default start, you are going to have a war breakout unless there's a really, really weird strategy going on the part of France. You're going to have a war between England and France break out basically immediately. As you do in the video game. So at one point, I think this got patched out. At one point, they actually started in a state of war. I think that's not the case anymore. I think they started peace, and you got to declare that war in the video game, EU4, that is. William Bird, welcome to the stream, mentions that WDG, which I believe you mean Wargame Design Group, has a Little Bighorn game called Last Stand. And Pete 41 mentions Zombicide. Undead and Alive is a Wild West version of Zombicide, just released recently. There's no faster turnoff for me. I guess there's two. Than to say this game is a game with zombies, or this game is a game with steampunk. Because I believe that both of those are fairly tired. So Jeff Beeler mentions Old West skirmish war games like the Old West 1816 to 1900 from 1970. Of course, the American West has this sort of cultural icon level status, right? Where for almost the entire history of cinema, for example, we've been seeing Western films. And pretty much, I've got several prototype card cases that are shit, but they may serve as temporary holding places for all these cards while we figure out how we're going to store them. I mean, I assuming the card case I'm printing works out, we're covered on that. I just need to print 3 of them. So, DVG says steampunk zombie leader. I have really not looked at the DVG leader games at all. They don't seem to hold my interest. Many of them, not all of them, many of them are modern, and I'm a lot less interested in modern war games than I am historical war games. And that's just, my personal interest, right? I see war games as a window into history. And if it is super duper modern history, I'm just not as interested in that. So, or modern hypothetical history. I make exceptions, right? I got a decent number of NATO versus Warsaw Pact games, probably half a dozen that do various things. And I guess I'm counting Red Storm, which I still don't know where the hell that's at. Maybe it'll turn up because I know there is one more box of games in the garage. There shouldn't be any war games in that box, but I know that it contains some Traveler stuff and it contains my copy of Twilight Imperium. Jeff Beeler, Silverton, the game of Colorado railroading. Now, just the name of it, I'm not investigating that at all, but just the name of it makes that sound like a train game. And as I've said about train games, I hate train games until I play one and have a good time, and then I'm like, yeah, it was okay, and grumble about it. So, and I haven't played that many train games. And I've played the 18xx games once or twice. It's been a long time. And certainly I'm not one of those super duper hardcore 18xx folks. Carl Crater from the Wargame Boot Camp says that Kevin Costner and Robert Duvall in Open Range, one of the best westerns ever. That's just a couple years old, I believe, and I haven't seen it. It's gonna have to climb a very large mountain to be even remotely as good as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which I believe to be the best western of all time. Some YouTube channel, not sure I remember who, did a best westerns of all time, best movie westerns of all time. So I'm being clear. And their number one best western of all time was Star Wars. Now, I am somewhat sympathetic to observing that Star Wars does use a lot of Western tropes. Okay, no problem. And that's kind of a characteristic hallmark of science fiction, but which Star Wars really isn't anyway. But it feels super duper lazy to put together like a best list of top 10 westerns and have 9 westerns and then put Star Wars on the top. That's not what people tuned into your list for. Throw it in as an honorable mention. I can see that. Jeff Beeler mentions Treasure of the Silver Dragon Micro Quest number 4 in the metagaming Micro Quest series, set in Viking era New Mexico, programmed adventure for melee and wizard. So a hex encounter war game. Okay, so that sounds intriguing. Melee and wizard are sort of 2 of the components that evolved into their own RPG. Let me plug the phone in here. Fantasy RPG called the Fantasy Trip, designed by Steve Jackson, US Steve Jackson, not UK Steve Jackson, for those confused about that. I have never seen The Searchers. I haven't seen that many westerns, but I've seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I really loved The Sons of Katie Elder as a kid. That's a relatively hilarious casting of John Wayne and Dean Martin as brothers. And then there's a younger brother who's a Yahoo and who nobody remembers who played the youngest brother. So, and I haven't seen that in a long time. There's a whole pile of good Clint Eastwood westerns, obviously, starting with the Man with No Name trilogy, Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Of the 3, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the best one, and it's not close. But that's not because the other 2 are bad. It's because The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is that damn good. My wife does not like westerns at all. And I put that on the TV and was watching it, and she was kind of wandering in and out. And by like an hour into the movie, she's like in front of the TV. So, Unforgiven is a good movie. It's a very well made movie. I found the ending to be anticlimactic, which I believe is in keeping with Clint Eastwood's objective there. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but I feel like there's a whole lot of build up, and it just kind of gets resolved like that, and it was a little anticlimactic. The Outlaw Josie Wells, I it's a good movie, but Tombstone's a good movie. It is cheesy, as FIFA A mentions. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Tombstone's pretty. It's a good movie. Let me ask this question though: is it nearly as good a movie without Val Kilmer in it? I'm not sure that it is. I think it's a decent movie otherwise. I think that uh, to the degree that one can elevate it over other Western movies, I think it's Val Kilmer that is doing that. Jeff Beeler mentions the Wild Bunch. Is that the Sam Peckinpah movie with the Carradine brothers and the um I think that was it. I did not get through Hateful Eight. I watched it for about 45 minutes and said, "Man, I can't watch this anymore." I am quite sure that there's something to see in that movie, but it's just too fucking long. Like many of Quentin Tarantino's recent efforts, it's just too fucking long. Now, despite that, I've watched I think all the other ones. I got through um, uh, Inglorious Bastards, and which is an interesting film, and you'll know what I mean if you've seen it. High Noon has been mentioned. The Searchers, which I haven't seen, has been mentioned. I haven't seen those, and I haven't seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I Manatee. You are absolutely right. I am think that the Wild Bunch is the Sam Peckinpah movie, but the Long Riders is the one where it's all the brothers that play the brothers in the movie. Um, I do think that Michael Bean's Johnny Ringo gets a little undersold because it's against him that Val Kilmer is playing after all. Um, yeah, the Quaids, the Carradines, the Guests, and some other people, as I recall. The only one I remembered was the Carradines. It's otherwise a bit. It's kind of a bit of a novelty film in my opinion. Um, Jeff Anderson says that Doc Holliday always overshadows Wyatt Earp in the OK Corral Tombstone movies. Not the case in the Kevin Costner Wyatt Earp, that's for sure. In there, Doc Holliday is played by Dennis Quaid, who's a perfectly good actor, but boy, he's not. I mean, you just watch that and you watch and just pay attention to Doc Holliday because the movie it's not a terrible film, but it's very schlocky, it's very saccharine, and it is not comparable to Tombstone in any way. And I just said that I don't think Tombstone is as good a movie as you think it is because the movie you think it is the movie with Val Kilmer in it as Doc Holliday. Um, but Wyatt Earp is watchable. I'll give it that. John Stanley mentions Shane. If we haven't mentioned that so far, 310 to Yuma is actually an interesting one. And the remake of that, we've seen a number of Western remakes recently, including 310 to Yuma. I haven't seen either one. And True Grit, which is the original was popular enough to spawn at least one sequel. There might even have been two. Um, and Jeff Bridges, yeah, is really really good in the remake. So Pete 41 mentions Old Yeller actually, which I haven't seen that as a kid. I don't want to watch that again. I don't want to watch a movie where the dog dies. So sorry if that's a spoiler, but you should be warned when the dog dies. I believe that to be a permissible spoiler. The Keach brothers in The Long Riders, Stacy and that other Keach. The Shootist is actually really good as well. John Wayne, Ron Howard. That's a very good movie. And John Wayne's of course playing a aging gunfighter dying of cancer. as John Wayne is an aging American dying of cancer because he smoked 3 packs of cigarettes the whole time and a day, and was at for like the last 20 years of his life was operating on like 1/4 of one lung. So Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, obviously a very good movie. Interesting stylistic choice to use contemporary music in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. An example where I think that did work. I am not at all convinced that this deck is going to fit in the box I designed for it. Not at all. It does look like it will, but man, it's going to be close. Yeah. I Manatee mentions Rooster Cogburn, which is the sequel to True Grit, and then there is a prequel with Warren Oates of all people. And I'm carving through these things like a lunatic. What did I order? I ordered 400 of these. I hope I have enough because they took like a week and a half to get here. So I would just as soon not have to wait another week and a half for 2 more packs. And the local game stores around here. One of the reasons I went on the local game store crusade over the weekend actually was Brant from the Armchair Dragoons. Welcome back to the stream. Broken Arrow, but not the John Travolta one, which I saw and which I honestly remember very little about, other than that John Travolta was in it. So that usually indicates that it's not that good. Jeff Beeler mentions, of course, The Conqueror, which is the somewhat legendarily bad John Wayne movie in which John Wayne plays Genghis Khan. Now, that's an interesting casting decision, to say the least. So yeah, no thanks. Young Guns is actually a you look at it and it's like, oh, it's this Brat Pack movie. This is going to be very self-absorbed, and it kind of is. Despite that, and I'm not speaking for the sequel, Young Guns is a way better movie than it deserves to be completely honest. Quigley Down Under is a pretty good movie, actually. It's Tom Selleck and Laura San Giacomo. And as somebody mentioned, the original Magnificent Seven, and David Imperato beat me to it. The original Magnificent Seven is the Seven Samurai. The remake of the Magnificent Seven, which I have to say, not the original, but the Yul Brynner Magnificent Seven is probably one of my personal favorite Western films. It's just so much fun. It's got so much color and flavor in it. And it's got Yul Brynner and Charles Bronson and like everybody. And the great Eli Wallach in it as well. So, it's been remade several times. And most of those have been, a couple of those were for TV, and those were all wretched. But the relatively recent remake with Chris Pratt and Denzel Washington in the Yul Brynner slot is actually pretty good. So I didn't think it was as good as the original, but I thought it was pretty good. Um, Carl, Carl, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp. I bust this line out all the time, man. Where's your God now? Get back to work. So I haven't seen any of those 1883, 1923, 1986, whatever those friggin' things are on Hulu or whatever the hell they're on. I haven't seen any of them, but they're super duper popular. They're all spin-offs of Yellowstone, and I'm also a little unclear as to what the show's got to do with Yellowstone, but that's another thing. I was a kind of a Yul Brynner fan as a kid, and largely I think that's due to Westworld and the Magnificent Seven, I think. Tom MC, welcome to the stream. We have in fact mentioned Gunslinger, and we've I believe moved on to Western films mostly, but at least we're sticking with half the topic. So that's something. Eli Wallach was amazing in the Magnificent Seven, and really amazing in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as well, and actually pretty good in The Godfather Part 3, now that I think about it. Aliens versus Cowboys. I didn't see that, and neither did anybody else. So, John C, are we transitioning the chat back to war games? We'll probably mention war games again at some point. Bonanza. I think we have to agree that um, uh, Bonanza is sort of a central part of a lot of Americans' early childhood television viewing experiences. And it had a great theme song. That's about all. Treasure of the Sierra Madre from Jason Patterson. That's a good selection as well. Um, Groucho Marx is here. That's something else. That's the marks we want to see, but not the marks we deserve. Gunsmoke, yeah, and The Rifleman with Chuck Connors. I mean, there's a huge history of Western television too. Very little of which I watch, to be completely honest. I mean, I guess we have to count Little House on the Prairie as well if we're going to talk about Western television, right? Farshad Niazi, welcome back. Out of context, AI is recently conquering all domains. What do I think about its impact on wargaming? I am not sure that it's going to have any impact on our sphere of wargaming anytime soon. Let me put it that way. Where I think it is going to end up having more immediate impact inside hobby gaming are the places where it's already having impact, which is in the area of the AI generated art, where it is now possible to be a publish games and not pay an artist because you had AI generate the art. Now, lots of platforms are taking stances against that, and I want to say the drive through RPG, which is where you would probably go if you were trying to sell RPG material, for example. Um, but I could be wrong about that. I'm not really keeping that close an eye. I did sign up and play with ChatGPT a little bit, but not nearly as Harold Buchanan is getting amusement out of it. The Ozymandias of wargaming. Um, Now, one thing, as Todd Cox mentions, so this would be, in fact, really interesting if you could like get a like legit AI opponent for war games. Um, but for those of us who have actually played a computer war game, I think we can all generally agree that the artificial intelligence that runs the adversary in computer war games is generally a bozo. So there are some partial exceptions to that, but video game technology is nowhere close to leveraging this capability. I don't want to say nowhere close, but it's certainly not right there. Let me put it that way. So yeah, I don't know what's up with Dan. He said something came up, but he's fine. That's all I know. I'll yell at him next week. Don't worry. Probably before. Um. Jeff Beeler mentions that the Little Wars TV YouTube channel, which if you're into miniatures, is a really good YouTube channel, by the way. Um, we're doing another spot check on whether this shit's gonna fit. Man, it's gonna be right there. Cowboys versus aliens. It was mentioned. It was mentioned. Actually, that at letting the AI figure out the answers to your ASL rules question sounds actually like a really good idea. Um, Let me put it this way: if you like go to Chat GPT, and not that this is necessarily the most robust AI model floating around out there, one can rest assured that the world's governments have access to better AIs than I do. Okay, so um, I think you're going to find that I forgot what I was going to say. Is what I think is going to happen. Bone Tomahawk. I didn't see that, and that's another one that nobody else saw either. Cowboys versus Aliens did have Harrison Ford, who's been not awesome at picking good material in the last 10 years or so. So, and Daniel Craig, right? I just remembered that. but I didn't see that. Somebody mentioned the Maverick film with Mel Gibson and Jodie Foster, and that's a fun movie too. Um, so I don't feel like with Mel Gibson played the character the same way as James Garner did, but that by itself is not a hugely problematic thing. So, but yeah, I mean, many even very recent computer war games, and I'm thinking of uh, combat command shit. What's it called? Um, the name I have in my head is Command Decision, and I know that's not what it is. Um, but I unfortunately paid actual cash money for it, and that turned out to have been a terrible decision. The game I am thinking of is Strategic Command. Now, maybe the World War one is okay, but I've got the War in Europe one, and it's a turd. Do not like it. So it's like so the promise of the computer war game, right? Going back to the very early 80s, if not the late 70s, when people started talking about this, was that it was going to bring more simulation to us, but the computer was going to handle all that simulation, and therefore we were going to be able to have an enjoyable wargaming experience without having necessarily to deal with as much overhead. That has proven to be what I think, not for technological reasons, but for commercial reasons, that has obviously turned out to be total horseshit. Even a game like Strategic Command has it's exactly as complicated as Axis and Allies. There's no deeper game engine in there. There's AI it just cheats. There's no like actual even so much as a bot to run the thing, right? You're getting a far better designed experience, whether you're playing with other people or solitaire against a bot opponent, with manual war games now than you generally are with computer war games. There are some good ones, but mostly they suck. I heard very good things about the John Tiller games, which is now part of Wargame Design Studio, and the more recent Gary Grigsby games. Gary Grigsby's more War in Russia from back in the day, I did not like at the time. Might have a different feeling about it now because Gary Grigsby's War in the East, I think, is very good. War in the West is a lot, right? It's a lot. So I have not really been able to get a handle on War in the West at all. I think I did a couple of videos over on it on the digital channel, but we did not get very far. I love James Garner. James Garner was great. There's like a podcast dedicated exclusively to the Rockford Files, for example. And just think about, you know, how good that show must be for there to be a years long podcast about it. A show that ended 40 years ago or whatever it is. Um, Carl Crater from the Wargame Boot Camp says that that the decisive campaigns games, and presumably the rest of them, and not just Barbarossa, are good. Um, Tom MC says Grigsby's War Between the States is good, but I don't know that you can get that without going to maybe Matrix and um and buying a super primitive looking thing, and that stopped me. Well, didn't stop me. It's kind of also in the way for Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific, um, which I think is a serious design issue. The daily turns are a serious design issue. I think that was a bad decision. Are these like 20 card packs? How many sleeves are in these things? This says 50, but I've got like 2 packs left. I ordered 8 packs. Uh I think I have enough, but it's gonna be very barely. Fortunately, none of the extra stuff requires these bigger sleeves, so I think I'm gonna be okay. But man, it's damn tight. I got a giant pile of these sleeve packages over here too. Jeff Beeler says you can't have the Rockford Files without James Garner. I'm inclined to agree with that, but I'd probably said the same thing about Maverick as well, to be honest. Stacking Limit says Ardennes is a turd. I assume that means the decisive campaigns Ardennes. So as Brant mentions, John Tiller Studios um, basically went away with the passing of John Tiller, and its assets were sold to Wargame Design Studio, which has taken over and is, I think, making some headway at improving the game's pretty dire interface and graphics. But I don't think it's where it needs to be yet, from what I've seen. I'm willing to give it another look at some point. Bayonet Brent says that James Garner's best role was in The Great Escape. Okay. I'm not I am not going to fight you on that. I think that's a very respectable choice. It's one of those weird things where at one point remember that you were either a TV actor or a movie actor, and movie actors were considered more prestigious. So you got a sort of poo-pooed if you were a TV actor. I think that's fairly silly, but that is the way it was. And James Garner, while he did have a decent number of movies, he was predominantly known as a television actor. Um, oh, this is totally not working. We'll figure it out after the show's over with. All right, we're on age 4 or era 4 here. There's a truly massive amount of shit in this thing. Support your local sheriff. Good call on that one too. Todd Cox says if they updated the campaign series graphics, he would definitely look at it again. I agree with that. I think it really needs a graphical and UI overhaul. If it got that, even to a passable degree, I'd be fine with it. I do not demand cutting edge graphics, but I demand graphics that don't look like their old Amiga graphics. So I also like Dean Martin as a singer and as an actor, but I'm of the generation where my other than things like the Sons of Katie Elder, my like probably biggest exposure to Dean Martin as an actor was frankly probably in the Cannonball Run movies. Patty Rafesky says, "What about a CNC Western implementation?" I think that is a great idea. Actually, I think you could totally make that work. Jeff Beeler, thanks so much. I have not played Richard Berg's Wyatt Earp. As with all Richard Berg games, it's probably worth a bit of a look. That doesn't mean it's good, but there's a chance that there's something really special in there, as with a lot of Berg designs, and it's worth kind of teasing out which games have something special in them. I'm not sure that Wyatt Earp did. And Pete 41, thank you so much for the support. Much appreciated. Used to play the Boot Hill RPG. We did mention that toward the beginning of the show. So back to this, because I actually think it's a pretty interesting idea. Richard Borg's preference is for miniatures with commands and colors, not for blocks. But then when he went to GMT, the way I heard the story was GMT said, no, we cannot do that. So blocks it is. Which is why many of the non-GMT commands and colors games do in fact have miniatures. I think you could totally make that work, actually. I'm not sure what you would do to different. I'd be inclined to have individual figures rather than units per se in a Western situation, and just say, okay, here's a gunfight, right? But you could totally do that. I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that. I don't see any reason why it couldn't work. This could actually happen. There's enough Berg stuff that we could spend another entire show on Berg, but there's also a lot of other designers that are obvious candidates for doing such a show, and certainly some of them will end up showing up at some point. I probably won't surprise anybody in saying that Mark Herman's on that list, Jim Dunnigan's on that list, Ted Racer's on that list. You'd have to be a certain level of prolific to, I think, fill up 2 hours with that. But somebody who I think is a fabulous designer, like Mark Simonich. I'm not sure Mark Simonich has done enough games to do a whole show on him in that context. So even though he's been doing this for a long time and has a lot of great games, at least I had some water this time. So that's about as much preparation as I did. Jeff Beeler mentions that the Long Riders is about the Northfield, Minnesota raid skirmish situation, not your basic gunfight. Yeah. And there's the Old West is riddled with stuff like that. Even the gunfight at the OK Corral, I think you could. Again, I think I would do it as like one, like a unit is one dude with a scattergun or whatever he's got. But even if you stipulated that, I think you totally make that work. I think there's a, you know, I will absolutely agree that Volko has a lot of good games. But I also don't know that I'm a show like that. The way I've been running these shows anyway, which is not to say that the format isn't changed or that I am necessarily beholden to that particular doing it that particular way. Um, I feel like I'd be basically going through their entire catalog, right? With somebody like Volko or Mark Simonich or a number of other good designers that are working today, particularly. But even with somebody like, and I'd be curious to try and figure this out. Um, how many games did Randall Reed design, for example? Mark, thanks so much, much appreciated. Thank you for the support as always. Um, that number might be high. That might be high. Some of those Avalon Hill fellas, including Richard Hamblin, the designer of Gunslinger, for that matter, um, had more games than you might think, and we didn't ascribe the same prominence to the designer at the time. So unless you just happened to know that Richard Hamblin designed Gunslinger, then you just might not know that. This one is a bit. Has a bit of extra plastic on it. I think we will retire this particular sleeve. Frank Chadwick. Ah, that's a good point. Yeah, Chadwick has had his hands in a lot of designs, and Frank's also one of the relatively few people I could do a show on that I've actually met. So there's that. I could do a show on Joe Miranda, actually. Joe Miranda has done an absolute butt ton. Yeah, we're going to be okay on this. An absolute butt ton of game designs, as has Ty Bomba. So, um, could easily get Chris Perello's done a lot of games, for example. We could easily get something like that. We did this show on magazine games, but I haven't. The trouble with that is you're either focusing on a specific magazine or it's going to be difficult to assemble that list unless it is a list of my personal favorite magazine games, which aligns rather closely with the list of magazine games on the shelf behind me, by the way. But I mean, that's always going to be how it works, right? You like the games you played and liked, and the ones that you haven't played, you're not sure about. So, John Butterfield, I'd have to look at John Butterfield's ludography and Joe Belkowski, both of whom are spectacularly good designers. Kevin Zucker as well, thinking about it, but and Zucker has done enough to, I think, just numerically justify such a show. But what I think that would end up looking like is the best of the library of Napoleonic battles, and that makes it kind of tough to do a show on it, right? Dean Martin's roast, yeah, not me. I never saw that when it was on. I'm not sure when that even was. I'm aware of it, but that's about it. Um, uh, boy, I've got a very high opinion of Joe Balkowski as a designer. Let me put it that way. Very high. I mean, tremendous props for the great campaigns of the American Civil War, if nothing else. So you also get these setup cards. So this is the one for Brandenburg in 1444, and on the back you have Prussia in 1618. Although I think it's still Brandenburg at the beginning of that period. I think. Um, Okay, so local game store. So we've got about 6 game stores here in the Akron area. Okay. So I went to a store called shit, I can never remember the name of this place. Place Inc. or something like that. It is in Wadsworth. It's in downtown Wadsworth. They've been open for about a year or two. They had maybe 2 war games on the shelf, something like that. They sold a lot of copies of Root over the holidays. It's where I actually bought the mini sleeves because I was really hunting for sleeves more than anything else. But other than that, and they had a D&D game happening in the basement. So, and they've got a nice play space. So it was a cool store. I can't remember the name of the damn store. Nope. I'm ceasing to think about it. But a couple days later, I went to Kenmore Comics, which is in Akron, and which is a store I used to go to somewhat regularly when I lived in the Cleveland area, but it's not exactly in Cleveland, right? It's like a 45-minute drive from where I was. Well, now it's like a 20-minute drive. So I went down there, and while they didn't have sleeves and they don't have nearly the amazing selection of RPGs that they had back in the day, and honestly, I'm not sure they have a great board game selection in general. They had the best GMT selection that I have seen in a brick and mortar store in probably 10 or 15 years. They didn't have anything else other than some Hasbro stuff like Axis and Allies. But they probably had 30 or 40 GMT games on the shelf. So if I need stuff from GMT and I want to support the local retailer, that's where I'm going. Now I also stopped by over the weekend. I stopped by the War Zone. Now I've talked about this place before, and it is a sort of hellish blend of hoarder meets game store. It is super duper old school shit. There's like literally war games on a shelf behind some stuff, which is in turn behind a shelf, which is in turn behind a giant man's height stack of games stacked on the floor. So I mean, you cannot go in there and just buzz in, get what you want, and leave. That is not happening. So be prepared to spend an hour or two in there just rooting about if you go for their war game section. Um, um, and prices are decent. They're not like amazing prices, but they're decent. He's got a lot of stuff. He's got a fair amount of SPI stuff. There were some flats. There were some SPI white flats, which is not something you see very often at all. There's some stuff from Decision, which is very seldom seen in brick and mortar stores. There's a fair amount. There's a lot of stuff from Avalanche Press. A huge quantity of Panzer Grenadier stuff. You know my opinion on Panzer Grenadier. We are over time, but I'll finish this particular question. So there is quite a bit of used game. I don't know what exact condition it was because it was like everything that I had already, but a bunch of TCS, some OCS. I think there's a DAC buried in there. There's a Decision War in the Pacific in there. You know, you may or may not see this stuff if you visit, but it's amazing that it's still in business. It's amazing that it hasn't been shut down by the fire department or the building condemned or anything like that, or burnt down to claim the insurance money. So it is a remarkable store that is, you know, worth your time if you do not mind. But if you are claustrophobic in any way, stay away because you are going to flip the fuck out in that store. Not to mention the potential for bodily injury. I've got these cards sliding all over the place. I got to deal with this as soon as we wrap up here. Not to mention the fact that a stack of games might fall on you and kill you. That could happen in that store. Okay, folks, we are out of time. Hopefully, we will have Dan back next week. Hopefully, you have enjoyed this 1 hour and 4-minute line of complete bullshit that I've been feeding you. So remember that Dan's got his pre-recorded show early Saturday morning. Check that out at No Enemies Here. Check out my live stream at 8 p.m. Eastern time on Monday nights. Don't know what next week's show will be. I normally know that show's topic a few days in advance, and I normally post it earlier that day. I normally know this show's topic no more than an hour in advance, unless I have a guest lined up. We do have some guests lined up, just not this week. And unfortunately, we had no Dan. So I would like to thank everybody for watching. If you want to support the channel, there's links in the video description, so check all that out. Thanks, Kim, for sending people our way. That is much appreciated. and we will see everybody again soon.
Big move. Big win.